Okay, great.
The
Glad
teacher
to
that's
meet you.
leading it, and then this is our first student that's going to have a question for you.
Okay, well, are we going to start now? Want to?
Are we ready?
Yeah, I guess so.
How are you today?
I'm fine. Is it cold up there?
Oh, yes, it is. We had snow yesterday. It's actually kind of moderate today in the 20s, so not too bad.
Long time ago, when I went to college, I was at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, so
Oh,
I know how cold it gets.
yes. How cold is it by you?
Oh, it's going up to 50 today.
Oh, my gosh.
We've had nice weather lately, so
Very
this
good.
morning it was 4 degrees, but it'll go up to 50, so.
All right,
Okay.
we're going to start then with our first student, and her name is Anna.
Anna, okay.
What made you want to write the Crispin series?
Well, I'm a professional writer, and when I sit down and have to decide about a book, I want to write a book about something that I will find interesting as well. And I had been reading about the medieval time, and I just thought it was interesting. So I began to think about a story, and I came up with the basic idea for the story, and then you just begin, and that's the way it started. So, but remember, I make my living by writing, so I have to write a book if I want to pay the mortgage and buy food and so forth and so on. So that's my profession, that's my work. Okay?
And just to give you some background we are just about finished with the Crispin Cross of Lead. So we are just at the point about all of us where they have taken Bert Bear to the castle and are holding him captive, and Crispin has got to figure out what he's going to do.
Well, you have a long way to go.
Well, we're pretty close to the end. All right, so let's scooch out. Would you like the students to give their name at the beginning?
I would appreciate that.
All right.
Hello.
Hello,
My name
what's your name?
Kylie.
Kylie, nice to meet you.
My question is, how long did it take you to get the idea and write the book?
Well, it's hard to say how long it takes to get an idea. It takes a lot of thinking. Sometimes an idea will stay in my head for years before I write the book. Sometimes I get the idea and I sit down very quickly. But as for writing the book, it usually takes about a year to write a book. Sometimes longer, sometimes less. The longest time it ever took me to write a book was 14 years. That was a book called Bright Shadow. And the shortest time ever took me to write a book was a book called Sore Losers, and that took me 1 day. So there's an enormous range in how long it takes to write a book. But generally speaking, about a year to write the book, and then another year for the whole publication process, which is very different. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
What's your name?
Daniel.
Hi, Daniel. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Do you like all that cold Wisconsin weather?
Oh, it's really cold.
Do you ski or snowshoe, or do you like to play snow?
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
Good.
Um,
It's a good thing you like it.
Yeah, definitely. So much of it. My question is, why did you include a cross of lead?
Well, curiously enough, when I first wrote the book, that cross of lead was not in it originally. That's hard to believe, but it wasn't there. But when I went to England to do some research, I was in a museum and I saw an exhibit, a case, an open case, which had many of these crosses of leads on display. And the minute I saw that, I realized that gave me a way to tell Crispin's story in a very visual way. So I decided to add that cross of lead to it. And if you want to, you can go online and you can see those crosses of lead, what they look like. They were very crude. They weren't fine in any way. They were absolutely crosses, Christian crosses, but they were pretty sad-looking objects. But clearly they meant a great deal to the people who were given them, or the souls that were given to them, I should say. So you can go online and look them up, and you see pictures of them.
Cool.
Okay. All right? You do that.
Hello, my name's Ava.
Ava?
Mm-hmm.
Like Avi with an A at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, so you come first in front of me.
Yeah.
Okay.
My question is, how did you come up with the characters and their names?
Let's start with the names. When you write historical fiction, I want to give names that suggest the time and the culture in which the story takes place. And believe it or not, I have books of names which tell me how to locate them. Crispin was obviously a saint's name, and I knew about his name because there's a famous speech in one of Shakespeare's plays, Henry V, and it's called the St. Crispin Day speech. And I remember reading that, so I like that name because it wouldn't be difficult for you, the modern reader, to pronounce it. So I like that name and I chose it. Now, once you choose a name, then you begin to build a character. And my process of writing is a lot of rewriting. I rewrite any book I do 70, 80 times. And as I rewrite, I get to know the characters better. It's a little bit like when you meet someone for the first time, you don't know them very well, but every time you meet them, right, you get to know them a little better. And that's the way it is when I write these books. So the character gradually emerges, and that's the way it was for Crispin.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name's Ella.
Hi, Ella.
My question is Crispin based on a real story?
Not really, no, I would say not. There's one historical character who's real, and that's the priest, John Ball, who was a real person at that time. And he would lead a great revolution in England that was not successful, in which he tried to abolish feudalism. But he's the only real character. Everybody else is an imaginary, is somebody I invented. Do you have a favorite character so far?
Probably Crispin.
Okay. You like Bear?
Yeah.
He's cool. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Annalise.
Say it again.
Annalise.
That's an interesting name. I like that. Thank you.
My question is, how do you come up with such colorful descriptions for your characters?
A writer whose work I admire, named Paula Fox, once said to me, the writer's job is to imagine the truth. The writer's job is to imagine the truth. So my job as a writer is to try to visualize in words the world in which my characters live. I do a lot of research. I try to get information and get a sense of how the world of that time worked. And then I try to put it into words.
Do you think of yourself as Crispin?
No, not at all. No. Hi, what's your name? Nate? Hi.
What is your favorite character from the first Crispin book?
I think I like Bear best of all. He seems to have all this energy and great personality. Who's your favorite character?
I'm going to have to say the same, Bear.
Okay. And what did you like about him?
The fact that at first, like, we didn't know anything, and as time went on, Bear and Crispin grew a relationship with each other and got to know more about each other.
Right. Yeah, I like that too. It's a good part of the book. Okay, thank you.
Hi,
Hello,
I'm Sophia.
Sophia.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called Sophia's War. It's all about a girl named Sophia.
What's your favorite part in the Crispin book?
Well, there are three of them, right? The second book, I think, is better than the first book. And there's a character in there, a girl in that story, named Troth, and she's one of my favorite characters. And I really like that story. So if you read on, you'll find her in the next book. So she's one of my favorite characters.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Hi, I'm Allison.
Hello, Allison. How are you today?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good.
Okay, my question is, if you were to change any part of the Crispin story, what would it be?
Well, we're talking about the first book, right? What would it be? I'm not sure. I don't know. I like it the way it is. Is there a part that you would like changed?
No, not really.
Well, I don't think I would change much. So it had a different beginning at first when I first wrote it, but we changed that. And I sort of liked that original beginning. I would have liked to have kept it, but my editor thought it wasn't so good, so we didn't. So maybe I would change the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Noah.
Hi, Noah. Are you the original Noah? Are you a boat builder?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so.
Not even a small boat?
I don't know. So, who would you be in Crispin's world? What character?
Oh my. I don't know. Maybe the priest, the first priest, the one unfortunately gets killed. But he was trying to be helpful and nice. So I like that. Which character would you like to be?
Oh, I guess John Ball.
Yeah, oh, he's a real person. So he was very interesting. So cool. I like that idea. What did you like about him?
Just his attitude and how we think that there should be change and freedom.
Oh, good. I'm on your side. Okay, good. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Molly.
Hello, Molly. How are you today?
Good.
Great.
My question is, why does Crispin have to be so unfortunate?
Well, when you write a book, believe it or not, it's hard to write a book about someone who's always happy. It's a curious fact. There are not a lot of books which are just full of happy people. So you have to have somebody who wants something in the book, who wants to make a change, or tries to solve a problem, or something like that. So Crispin, the idea was that Crispin doesn't know who he is, really, and the story becomes how he becomes who he is. So I like that idea.
Thank you.
Did you like the book?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Hi, my name is Joel.
Hi, Joel. How are you today?
Good. So my question is, where in England is Stromford?
It doesn't really exist. It's an imaginary place. My guess it's somewhere in the south of England, in what would be called Kent, the county of Kent or Sussex, but it's clearly in the south of England. So that's how I would put it, but you won't find it on a map.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Miranda.
Hello, Mehmet. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Same as was before.
So my question for you is, what is the most important lesson you wanted us as readers to take away after reading Crispin?
Well, I'm not so sure my books have lessons. I don't try to write with a lesson in mind. The idea is to write a good story. If you learn something about the time period, that would be good. Do you think there is a lesson in the book? What would you say?
Well, I think it's because Crispin has to take risks to get rewards in the end. So far I think that's one of the lessons that I've learned.
Okay, well, there isn't. Wait till you get to the ending. Maybe you'll change your mind in terms of what happens. So I would reserve your thoughts until you get to the ending of the book. Okay? Sure. Hello, what's your name?
John.
John? Okay, nice to meet you.
My question was, how much research did you need to do about the medieval times before writing your book?
A lot, a lot, because to tell you the truth, I didn't know that much about it to begin with, but you have to learn everything from the way people talk to what they eat, how they lived, where they lived, and how they thought about the world. They thought about the world very different than you and I do. So you have to learn all about that sort of stuff. And I read a lot of books and did a lot of research to write that book. So, a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Hello,
Hi,
my name's
what's your name?
Quentin.
Hi, Clinton.
My question is, when you wrote Crispin, did you expect it to succeed as much as it did?
No, you write a book, and at least in my case, you try to write it as well as you can, but you have no idea how people will receive it. You hope they like it. I certainly didn't have any expectation that it would win a Newbery Award, and it came as a great surprise. A nice surprise, but it was a surprise. So you never know how people are going to respond to your book. You might, I'm sure, I'm getting a sense from your class that most of you like the book, Crispin, but there must have been someone who didn't like it very much or found it boring. Maybe you did, but not that you're going to tell me, but it's not everybody likes every book. That's almost impossible. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Hi,
Hello.
my name's Macy.
Say it again.
My name's Macy.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
My question, how long did it take you to write your very first book?
You mean the actual book?
Like
Or
the first,
how long it took before I had written a book?
yeah, like the first book you ever wrote, how long did it take you to write that book?
Well, I made up my mind when I was in high school to become a writer, and it wasn't until 14 years later that the first book was published. Now, that first book was a book called Things That Sometimes Happen, and it was made up of a bunch of stories that I told my eldest son. So I don't know how long it took. He would get on my lap at night and say, "Tell me a story," and I would invent a story for him, and those became the book. So it was a matter of, I don't know, maybe a month to a year that I made up those stories. And then I wrote them down afterwards, and that became the book. So it's hard for me to say how long it actually took. Sure. Hello.
Hi, it's Josie.
Say it again.
Josie.
Josie? Okay, nice to meet you.
How much time do you spend reading and writing?
Reading my own writing?
Just any reading.
Oh, I read a lot, but I don't read my books very often. I had to read them maybe 1,000 times when I write them, so I don't read them again. Occasionally I do. Now, for example, I'm working on a book now that's a sequel to a book I wrote years ago, so I have to read that earlier book to make sure I get all the facts right. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm reading my own book. But that's sort of unusual. That's when that happens. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm David.
Hello, David.
My question was what other job would you have thought to do when you were a kid?
Say that again.
What other job would you have thought to do when you were a kid?
Well, what kind of things did I do as a kid?
Or like what job would you want to be when you were
Oh, lots of things. I wanted to be an airplane pilot, an engineer. I wanted to be an inventor of machines. Lots of different stuff. You know how it is. What do you think you'll do when you're older?
I want to like invent stuff or whatever.
That'd be cool. Great. Well, good luck.
Hi, my name is Brianna.
Hi there. How are you?
My question is, how old were you when your first book was published, and how long did it take it to be published?
I made up my mind to be a writer when I was 17, when I was a senior in high school. But I was about 30 years old when my first book was published. So it took a long time before I learned how to write well enough to get a book published. Writing's hard, at least it is for me. Do you like to write?
Not really.
It's very hard. You know the best way to learn how to write? Is reading. The more you read, better the writer you become. So if you like to read, you're on the way to becoming a writer, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Hello again, my question is next.
Okay.
All right, my question for you is, how often when you are finished with the book and you send it off to the publisher, do you think you're done and it'll be good to go, and then they turn around and say, nope, you need to do these revisions? How often does that happen and go back and forth?
It happens all the time. And it's not that I think it's done, but you work on a book for a year, and after a certain point, you don't see it very clearly. You're so familiar with it. And that's why you have an editor. And the editor comes back and says, well, I think you need to do this or that. And then I revise it and I send it back, and she says, or he says, okay, that's good, but I still think you need to do this. I just sent in a book to an editor, and she said, okay, I like it, but I think that the main character, who's a girl in the book, should really be a boy. So that's a big revision. And I have to think about that and see if it's doable. And that's a big change. But sometimes there are other big changes. I mentioned to one of your students that when we wrote Crispin, there must have been 10 different beginnings to that book. And I wrote one, and the editor didn't like it, and then we went back and forth until we agreed that we had a good beginning to the book. So that's a constant in my world of writing revisions.
And do you ever get to the point where the two of you don't agree? Or do they convince you to see their side?
They won't publish the book unless they're happy with it.
Yeah.
There are times I'm thinking that we have a friendly discussion and say, I don't think this works this way. And then we come to an agreement, but unless you're in some sort of agreement, it doesn't really work. So we have to come to an agreement.
Some compromise, is it often a
Yeah,
compromise? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hello,
Hello.
my name's Spencer, and my question is, what is your favorite subject? What was your favorite subject in school?
I liked history. I liked history because I liked the stories. And what I discovered is that if I went out and read history on my own, it would be different than what I was taught in school. Just because it's taught in school doesn't mean to say it's absolutely correct. There are a lot of versions of what happened in history, and there's always a different way of finding out about it. What's your favorite subject?
Math.
Math, good for you. That's my wife's favorite subject. She loves math.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi,
Hello. What's your name?
Ariel.
Ariel. Oh, that's from a good Shakespeare play. Did you know that?
No.
It's from a play called The Tempest. There's a main character called Ariel in it. She's a magical figure. Are you magical?
I don't think so.
Anyway, well, that's a lovely name, Ariel.
Thank you. When did you know that, like, you wanted to be an author?
Well, it was in high school, and I went to a very small high school, and the thing that they focused on more than anything else was writing and reading, and I just got very intrigued with it. Now, I will say I have a twin sister, and she's also a writer, so that tells you something about how we were brought up with lots of books and reading. She writes very differently than I do, but she is nonetheless a writer. I am. So writing was important in my life.
And someone else who isn't here had a question, and they wanted me to ask it for them.
Sure.
She wanted to know, when you were a kid, did you ever write stories in your free time?
Never. I told stories. I had a best friend, my cousin, and we would invent stories by which to play. In other words, we'd say, okay, let's pretend we are explorers and we're going through this country. And so we would invent a story as we sort of acted it out. So those were the first stories I invented. I didn't write them, though. I just made them up in my head.
Okay.
Sure. Thanks, Ariel.
Hi, I'm Angela.
Hi.
My question is, if you could bring any character from any of your books to life, which one would you choose and why?
Any of my books? There's a lot of books. There's about 80 books. I have to pick one character? Well, there's a character in one of them in the Poppy books. These are animal stories. And there's a porcupine in it named Erith. And he's a very funny, bumpy character. And he would be fun to have around the house. Would you like to have a porcupine around the house?
That would be interesting.
You could get him into your bed at night and snuggle up with the porcupine.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
sure.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Hi, Lily.
Who is your main supporter to be a writer?
Say it again.
Who is your main supporter to be a writer?
Who's your main supporter to be a writer?
Yeah, like who supported you most or inspired you to be a writer?
Oh, not my parents. They were very opposed to my becoming a writer. As I grew older, as a teenager and in college, I began to have friends who were writers, and they were encouraging to me. So I would say it was other writers who encouraged me. What do you think you'd like to do? Do you think you'd like to be a writer when you're older?
I I really enjoy writing, but I really would like to be a dentist.
A dentist? Why would you like to be a dentist?
I don't know, I just am really interested in that stuff.
What happens if somebody bit you?
I'd be really mad at them.
Very good. I hope you become a dentist.
Hi, my name's Allie.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
My question is, are you working on any new books right now?
Yeah, I'm working on about 3 different books. I'm finishing up one that is a sequel to an earlier book. And then I'm writing a new poppy book. And I've written a book about the gold rush in California. And then I have to write another book about Italy in the medieval times. So I'm pretty busy.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Anthony.
Hello.
So my question is, why did you go to the University of Madison, and what do you remember most about it?
I think I went there because my older brother went there, and he liked it a lot. And I had some high school friends who went there. And so I just thought that would be cool. And it was very inexpensive in that time. And it just seemed like a good place to go. You think you might go there?
Maybe. My
Maybe.
grandparents went there.
Okay, cool. All right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm Emily.
That's my twin sister's name. You're not my twin sister, are you?
No.
Just checking.
My question is, what's the most important thing in the world to you?
I think it is about other people and being kind and helpful to other people. And I think there's nothing more important in the world, particularly in the world we are, is to be kind to all kinds of people every day and in any way we can be. What would you say?
Yeah.
You would agree with that?
Yeah.
And it's not always easy, but I think it's a good thing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Alyssa.
Hi, Alyssa.
If you could tell your younger self anything, what would it be?
Oh, well, I was called different names. At home, I was called Avi, so I stuck with that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi,
Hello.
my name's John.
Hi, John. How are you?
Good. My question is, do you have any pets, and if so, what are their names?
We don't have any pets. We used to have a quite wonderful dog, an Alaskan Malamute, one of those huge sled-pulling dogs. But he just grew too old and he got ill and died, I'm sorry to say. But his name was McKinley, and he was a wonderful dog, and we still miss him.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hello.
You wrote 3 Newbery Honor Award books. How did you feel when you heard about that?
Well, it always comes as a surprise, at least it does for me. It's exciting, it's fun. It tells you that you are a good writer, and other people think you are, and that's very satisfying. You know, if you try to do something and people think what you do is good, that's always gives you a sense of success. So it's a very nice feeling, I would say.
What do you like to do in your free time?
I read a lot. I like to go exercise. I try to swim every day in a local pool and keep in shape. I do all the cooking in my household, so I try to make things that are interesting and different. So keep up with my kids, who are now adults and so forth. So I have a pretty full life.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi again.
Hey,
My question is, what's your favorite color?
you know, I like black. Now you'll say black isn't really a color, that's what they say. But I like black. I just think it looks good. What's your favorite color? Red? Everyone's wearing red in your school.
I like purple.
Purple, that's good. Purple's good color.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, how did you learn to keep writing even when people shoot you down?
Because it's what I wanted to do. Being stubborn is not such a bad thing if it means you want to be stubborn about work or trying to get better. So I guess I'm stubborn. It's not very, you don't hear people say, oh, it's a good thing to be stubborn, but I think it is. I think being stubborn about things you believe in is a good idea. Okay?
Hi again.
Hello?
What was like your favorite book that you wrote and then that somebody else wrote?
Well, I can't answer for either of them. I've read so many books. I could make you a list of my favorite books, as maybe you could. Do you like to read? Okay, well, it's hard to pick one book, and as for the books that I've written, I'm always trying to make the books that I work on the best that I possibly can. So they become my favorites for a short time, and then I move on to another book. So I don't know which is my favorite book. I really don't know. Sure.
All right, and then I have one final last question for you.
Sure.
You mentioned that beginning of the story, which I absolutely love the beginning of the story, how it turned out, and
Okay.
how it was published. My question for you is, can you give me some of the research behind the opening scene when Asta is buried with her feet facing east? I find it interesting because I've noticed after reading that, my father buried in the graveyard has his feet facing east. So what brought you to include that? How did that come about?
Well,
Or what can you tell me about your research
I
involving
think
that?
feet buried to the east, I think it's towards Jerusalem. I think that's, you know, in this period of time, people believed that in the Christian world, that Jerusalem was the center of the world. And it's where, you know, it's connected to Jesus and his story and so forth. I think that's where it becomes, but I don't know if it's part of Catholic doctrine or just tradition. I really don't know. But I noticed that when I was doing research, I noticed that, and I just thought that it was a good thing. I remember once I was a pallbearer in a funeral, and we were, sounds like a grim story, but I was helping carry out this coffin out of this religious institution, right? And all of a sudden, I think it was a synagogue, but all of a sudden the rabbi said, wait. And he suddenly opened the coffin and said, I just wanted to make sure his feet went out first. That's the rule. Now, I had no idea, but it was a bit of a gruesome moment. But these traditions, and whether they are founded in theology or scripture, I don't know. I suspect it has more to do with tradition and custom than anything else. But it's just a little tidbit. It's interesting.
So can you tell us about what your opening was to the story that didn't make it?
In those days, if I remember correctly, when you buried someone, you carried the body or the coffin around the perimeters of the parish. I don't remember if that's exactly true, and you did that prior to internment. And I think the book began with Crispin and the priest alone carrying his mother around the parish. But maybe my editor thought it was too grim. But I once lived in a community where I saw that happen, and it just struck me it was very dramatic and said something about something, I don't know what, but anyway, it wasn't in the book, so we took it out.
Well, we have enjoyed reading your story very much, and all the parts that are in it are perfect.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Do you have any final words for the kids, for the students?
Well, I would just say this, that if any of you are interested in writing, the thing that teaches you most about writing is reading. The more you read, the better student you are, not just in writing. It helps with math, it helps with any subject. Reading is, I think, the most important thing you can do when you're a young person. So that's some piece of advice.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm glad we finally got our connection together.
Okay, great. I hope you warm up.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your day. All right.